Hello everyone and welcome to Sinful Gaming. I hope you're all doing well, I hope you're all staying safe, and most of all, I hope you're all fighting that war against the Grey. Today, we're going to look through endless spells in Warhammer Age of Sigmar 3rd edition. What we aim to do in this video is we aim to look at, first of all, what they are, how they're used, and then go through all the generic endless spells that we now have the Warscrolls from, and sort of talk a little bit about each of them, how they can be used in your games, and what they can provide you in your games. So without further ado, what we're going to do to start with is we're going to look at exactly what is on an endless spell Warscroll and how it works. So let's start with looking at an endless spell Warscroll. So for starters, you have the name. This is right at the top of the endless spell Warscroll. You'll see, the name of the endless spell that you are using. You'll also generally find a little bit of flavor text underneath this as well, just telling you exactly what the endless spell is in the narrative of the game. On some endless spells, you'll also find parts as a drop-down part where you can sort of get told how many different pieces there are to the endless spell. Not all endless spells are a singular model. Some, like the Geminins of Ulgish, are actually 2, while some, even like the Warp Lightning Vortex, are 3 as well. And you've got other spells in the game that are also multiple part endless spells. The summoning part tells you exactly how to summon it. This is actually the spell that's used to summon the endless spell or invocation to the battle, or prayer that's used to summon the invocation to battle. And this just tells you the casting value, what it's needed to require, and also the range and where you have to and how you have to set up the model. Abilities, they go through everything from movement of the model, including as well any abilities of like aura effects or damage that the endless spell does. And this is pretty much where the main part of the endless spell sort of comes into. It'll tell you how far it moves, where it can move, how it has to move to keep different parts together if that is something that has to happen, and also give you, all the effects of the particular endless spell invocation on the Warscroll here. So, casting, unbinding, and dispelling endless spells. Endless spells have a spell on their Warscroll that summons them to the battlefield. Casting and unbinding an endless spell is no different to the normal interactions when casting and unbinding a spell as normal. So, endless spells, as mentioned previously, they have a spell on their Warscroll that summons them to the battlefield. This acts like any other spell your wizard can cast. They use one of their casts to cast this particular spell. They need to roll 2d6 to equal a value or better it. They add all the bonuses for casting spells that they normally would get, and your opponent tries to unbind them. And your opponent also receives any benefits they would normally to unbinding as well in this interaction. So this first part of just summoning an endless spell to the battlefield works no different than a normal spell, and the only thing obviously is that you set up the actual endless spell model at the end of the casting. Now, dispelling is an in-game term for trying to remove an endless spell from the battlefield. This is different than unbinding, and you need to pay close attention to this when you do, because certain models will get bonuses to cast and unbind, but not to dispel. And on the contrary, you also have models that also try and get bonuses to dispel, but don't get them to cast and unbind. Dispelling is the act of trying to remove it from the table once it's already on the table. Wizards and priests and a select few other models can attempt to dispel endless spells, and they do so by trying to roll 2 dice and meet the casting value of the spell or better it in order to remove it from the table. So you pick one endless spell that's within 30 inches of a wizard or priest or other model that has an ability to dispel like them. And if the roll is greater than the casting value of the endless spell, so this is the casting value on the Warscroll, not what it was cast at. So if your opponent rolls 2d6 and rolls a 12 to cast it, trying to dispel it later, you're not trying to get rid of that 12, you're trying to get rid of the 5, 6, or 7, or whatever is on the Warscroll. And so now we look at moving endless spells. And what do you mean by moving? Well, first of all, many endless spells don't actually move, but there are those that can are called predatory endless spells. Such spells are generally noted on the Warscroll as being predatory. Predatory endless spells are moved at the end of each hero phase. However, importantly, they are moved before any end of hero phase abilities or effects take place, obviously excluding the endless spells themselves. Now, before moving endless spells, you must first determine which are controlled and which are wild. Now, how you do this is you go through this little practice. So, predatory endless spell control. Before moving any of them, you must first determine which are controlled and which are wild. A predatory endless spell within 30 inches of the model that summoned it is controlled by that model. So this is a pretty decent range. It means your endless spells will generally be controlled by the wizard who summoned them. However, a wizard can only control one endless spell at once. So if you've thrown out 2 endless spells with the same wizard, he can't control both of them and has to pick which one to control. If there's more than one predatory endless spell on the table for each wizard, like I said, you only get to do 1. Now, both players then do this, they work out which ones are controlled by each wizard, and then the rest are considered wild. Now, the order in which you move Endless Spells and do their effects and all that is as follows. Moving Endless Spells is done in this particular order at all times. First, the player whose turn it is moves all their controlled Endless Spells, and then the other player moves all their controlled Endless Spells. After this is done, the players then alternate moving wild Endless Spells, starting with the player whose turn it is. This means if there's a lot of Endless Spells on the table that you can't control, either because the wizard who summoned them has died, or you cast too many with one wizard, etc., they'll start to run rampant and do things that maybe you don't want them to do. So it's really interesting sort of play here to make sure you've got enough wizards in your army to control them, and not only that, but your wizards need to stay alive as well to control them, because they're the ones bound to them. What we're going to do now, though, is we're going to go look at all the generic Endless Spells, talk a little bit about all of them, and then sort of see how we can use them in our games of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. First up, we have the Horrorghast. This is one of the Endless Spells that comes in the Forbidden Power box set. This was a box set brought out after the initial Malign Sorcery box set. You do get a couple of other Endless Spells with this, and a cool narrative campaign when you purchase this Endless Spell. But it has a casting value of 6, a range of 12 inch, and it's predatory with a move of 8 inch, and it can also fly. What's really cool about this Endless Spell is I think its stock has definitely gone up in the new edition of Age of Sigmar. Before, units that sort of negative bravery or affected battleshock in any way weren't really all that useful, as many armies has access to a lot of command points just to use Inspiring Presence all over the battlefield. That, however, has changed with the ability of Inspiring Presence only being able to be used once per battleshock phase now. Horrorghast definitely has some play. It's slightly changed. It doesn't provide minus to bravery anymore. However, units wholly within 12 inch of this Endless Spell cannot receive command in the Battleshock phase. This means no Inspiring Presence, and some of the other Endless Spells that work from your heroes, some of the other commands that work from your heroes in the phase don't work either. In addition, any unit wholly within 12 inch of this model that fails the Battleshock test adds an extra D3 models to the number of models that flee. Really nice. This pairs really well with some great minuses to bravery. If you can get something, you know, like a Charybdis with Felgaze in your Anvil Guard army is pretty cool. With its -3 is really going to help this Endless Spell work. Also, you know, just putting this on one of your flanks and allowing your shooting units down one flank. If your opponent's not got characters there, you can really sort of hammer home those Battleshock tests. And this also works well with, you know, even combining with things like Lumineth and their Catalar, making your opponent have to take Battleshock tests. This works in tandem with that as well, as your opponent has failed a Battleshock test. So really cool on that end as well. Next up, we have the Aethervold Pendulum. So this is a rather fun Endless Spell, and a pretty interesting one on how it works. So first of all, you've got a casting value of 5 for the initial spell. You have to deploy it within 6 inch of your wizard, and then it's also predatory, and it can move, and it can fly. So it's got an 8 inch move, flies. However, the interesting thing with this is this Endless Spell must move in a straight line. It swings backward and forward along the same path as if it were a pendulum. What's really cool about this, if you can get like wizards that can get onto your opponent's flank, say with a deployment shenanigans, or even things like, there's some really cool tricks you can play with, like Skaven wizards with skitter leaping, then casting an Endless Spell down the side of your opponent's army. This could be really fun and really interesting to do. Just throwing it across like your opponent's lines, or throwing it across like paths where objectives are in your opponent's deployment zone. You definitely got some tricks you can do with this. You can make this spell work for you, even if you let it go wild, because what it can do is, just because it has to move in that line, you can make it so it's not able to hit your own troops. What it does though is, for its damage wise, you roll a dice for each model it moves over. Well, for each unit that has a model that this Endless Spell passed over, you roll a dice, same as any units that it finishes within 1 inch of, which, you know, you can sort of work to maximize as you're casting this. And on 2+, they suffer D3 mortals. So you're going to take, a lot of units are generally going to take 2 D3 mortals from this, because it's going to swing back and forward, or it's going to force your opponent to move off of places to not take the mortal wounds. It's a really interesting and useful Endless Spell, because you can almost guarantee and predict where it's going to go. But that is its negative as well. Your opponent can also do this, so it means they can just move away and let it be, you know, a nothing spell. But you can use that to your advantage, making them move away from places you want to be. Chronomantic Cogs. So this is the first non-predatory endless spell that we're going to talk about. First of all, it's got a casting value of 6 and you have to place this within 6 inch of the wizard that summoned it to the battlefield. When the endless spell is set up, the controlling player can then decide whether they're going to speed up time or slow down time. If the wizard chooses to speed up time, you can add one to all the charge rolls for units wholly within 18 inches of the spell, and if you choose to slow down time, the wizard can cast another spell whilst they remain within 6 inch of the endless spell. You can also choose to change the effects of the spell. How you do this is at the start of the hero phase, if there's a friendly wizard within 6 inches of this endless spell, the player whose turn it is taking place can choose whether to change it to increasing or decreasing the speed of time. So giving you the other effects. This does mean opponents can run up to it. If you've got no wizards near it, they will take control of the cogs and change it to how they want. Cogs is really interesting. Plus one of the charges are really nice. You have to sort of plan to set them up. Now with how it works, generally that wholly within 18 inch bubble is pretty big on the new size tables. So you generally can get that, to work for you. Slowing down time is really nice. This can give you extra casts on a wizard. To really help, and some cool tricks. You can cast this first with your wizard, choose to slow down, and then get an extra spell to cast. Which is really nice. So yeah, you can cast this, then you get the free spell after, meaning you get another cast. So you can cast this up then and get a spell off on your first turn, and then you've got a double cast wizard for the rest of the game if that's what you wish to do with it. Next up, we have the Emerald Lifeswarm, who has a casting value of 6, a range of 6 inch as well when you first summon it, and then it's predatory, can move 8 inch, and can fly. Its effects are pretty simple. As the spell coming from the Realm of Life, you pick one unit within range of this end of spell after it's moved, and they can either heal D3 wounds, or if they're a unit of say 1 wound models, you can heal D3 wounds worth of models to the unit. Nice and simple, a little bit of extra healing. This goes nicely into some armies that have pretty harsh brackets on monsters. Where they start to suddenly drop on monsters that take a long time to drop, like Gargants could make great use of this. And there are ways to make Gargant wizards where you could get this off, and it could be, that determining factor of whether or not you get bracketed. Gargants don't start bracketing for a while, and generally your opponent has to put a lot into them to try and bracket them down to that, so it works pretty well there. And it also just works well with armies that have general healing in normal, so things like Living City for cities at Sigmar, heal 1 wound to all their big models anyway. You can heal another D3. Really, really cool. Just a bunch of effects you can play around with to get some extra healing into your army with this endless spell. Next up, the Prismatic Pallisade, and this one's pretty simple but has some really cool uses. So it's got a casting value of 5 and you have to place it within 6 inch of the wizard. What this one pretty much does is it blocks line of sight. If 2 models have to draw a line next to them, you draw a line between them, and if from the 2 closest points of the models, that's very important. And if that line draws over this model, then line of sight is blocked. This is great for actually defending units that don't need line of sight to shoot. So things like Venari, Aurelin, Sentinels make great use of the Prismatic Pallisade. Throw it out in front of them. They can't be touched by your opponent's shooting because they can't see them unless they get onto your flanks, which you can protect nice and easily with some of your wardens and other pieces in the army, and they can get free range of shooting because they don't care about line of sight. There's also other pieces within the game that have the same sort of effect. Maybe sticking a Celestant Prime behind it is really cool, or anything like that. And what's cool is this does not affect, or is not affected by models that have flight, like the Celestant Prime. So you can sit him behind there, bring down mortal wounds onto your enemy with your Celestant Prime, and not have to worry that he's going to get seen, because this Prismatic Palisade shines a bright, shiny light over him and allows him to do his thing. Next up, we've got the Umbral Spellportal, a casting value of 5, a range of 18, and both parts of this model must be set up wholly within 18. Generally, you're going to want one part of this set up really close to your wizard and the other one far away as possible, preferably near some of your enemy's models. Pretty much what this one allows you to do is once per turn, one of your wizards that's nearby the one end of the spell portal can shoot something through it. This does mean your opponent can shoot stuff back through you, so keep that in mind. That is something that totally can happen. However, in addition, an endless spell, if an endless spell is nearby, you can actually move endless spells through it if they're within range, generally 6 inch of the portal. And they move through it. They don't count as having moved, and so none of their effects are triggered, but this is a pretty cool effect you can use with like Lauchon The Soulseeker and some of the other endless spells we're going to look at to sort of get them to move around the battlefield. You can also use this to potentially, set up and move the Aethervold Pendulum to set up a new attack angle for it. Next up, the Soulscream Bridge, casting value of 6, and it has a range of 18. Both parts of this bridge must be set up wholly within 18 inch of the caster. Now, this one's pretty simple on what it does. You have a unit nearby one end of the bridge and it can move across it. One friendly unit per turn can move across the bridge. This counts as a setup, not a move, so they can't do anything else. They have to be outside of 9 and all that sort of stuff of all enemy units when they do so your enemies can crowd out the other end of the bridge. So you just got to make sure when you set it up that you can do what you want with it. And also just be aware that your opponent can also travel through the bridge back at you if they somehow kill your units on the other side. This is a great way to get maybe some Alpha Strike unit or even some slow Anvil units onto central objectives in the table. You know, something like a big block of, say, Liberators that can't move very fast, but you want to get them onto the center of the table and hold down an objective. This is a great way to get them there early and allow your other units to catch up later while the Liberators just hold the line. And so, Ravenak's Gnashing Jaws is next. Casting value of 6, range of 6, predatory, moves 3d6, which is pretty cool. Can be quite fast at times and can fly. What that 3d6 though is really good for is when you roll high on that, you can also get, you know, bigger rolls to get units in your opponent's backline, but also that is how it does its mortal wounds. You roll a number of dice for one enemy unit that this is moved over in the turn. You roll a number of dice that are equal to the 3d6 roll for the move, and for each 6+ that your unit suffers a mortal wound. This is really good for, you know, maybe trying to fish out some heroes. If you get those big rolls and the 3d6 can fly over and get some heroes in your opponent's backfield. Pretty cool stuff. Next, we have the Purple Sun of Shyish. This has a casting value of 8, pretty high for some of these endless spells, and a range of 6. It's predatory, moves 8 inch, and can fly. The thing with the Purple Sun of Shyish is that you actually have to roll before you start determining what's controlled and what's wild. And on a 5+, you roll a dice for this model. On that 5+, it becomes wild immediately. So this is an interesting thing with the Endless Spell. It's got a really cool effect and probably does more mortal wounds than most Endless Spells. However, it has the chance to become wild and sort of turn back and potentially be used against you. However, this is worth remembering that if it's, you know, the only wild Endless Spell and it's your turn, that means you're going to get to control it. So it's not quite as bad a downside as first it might seem. You can always, you know, try and use Unbinds or Heroic Dispelling or whatever it's called to try and get rid of this in your opponent's turn, so it's not there. But the effect it does is you roll a dice for each enemy unit this model is passed over, or that is within 1 inch of the model after it's finished its move. On a 1, nothing happens. On a 2 to 5, they take D3 mortals, but on a 6, they take D6 mortals. Pretty cool mortal wound output. It's got a little bit of a potential to turn back on you, but there are ways to counteract that. So I think this is a really fun end of spell, and it's one of the coolest ones. If you played Warhammer Fantasy, you love the Purple Sun. This was a thing from the old world that a lot of people were just so excited to see come back. Next, we have the Quicksilver Swords. So a casting value of 6, range of 6. It's predatory, moves 8, and can fly. So after you've moved this in the spell, you pick one friendly unit that it's moved across and you roll 12 dice. For each 6 rolled, the unit suffers a mortal wound. What's really interesting about the spell and what it does is that ward saves cannot be made against this spell. So what is this exactly good for? Well, it doesn't allow wards, but it doesn't particularly have, you know, a high ratio of mortal wounds. On average, you're doing about 2. This is a great way, though, to knock those last couple of wounds off a character or potentially get some through to bracket, you know, monster heroes with ward saves, looking at you, Stonehorns, and things like that. It does certainly have its use. The fact that it ignores wards can be really great for knocking off those heroes and dropping them down that little bit on their brackets to make them a little bit less scary to fight. Next, the Soulsnare Shackles, a casting value of 7, range of 12 inch, and this has 3 parts to it. They must all be deployed within 3 inch of each other. Generally, you're going to want to try to sort of deploy this in a triangular sort of formation to get the most out of it. Units, though, within 6 inches of this endless spell cannot run or attempt to charge. Really cool. This can really hurt some of your units. You can pin your opponent's units in their own deployment zone, especially if they've got low movement. Looking at some of the dwarven factions, if they're foot slogging, even Stormcast suffer from this. You know, you can make like Retributors all of a sudden like really struggle here with their 4 inch move. They're actually going to take multiple turns to get out of range. Then also, you roll any dice for each unit within 6 inch at the start of the movement phase, and on a 6 they suffer D3 mortal. So a nice little bit of damage in addition. This is going to really hurt slow units that can't get out of it. They're going to take a couple of mortal wounds, hopefully. If you can get lucky and roll a couple of 6s while they're in there, you know, that could be some really good damage onto a unit. But can really slow and hamper your opponent's units down. Getting this into your opponent's lines really early, if you can try and sort out and figure out a way, is really cool. You can also block up lanes of passage as well. If your opponent's trying to go through, you know, parts of the battlefield that don't have terrain, you can block up and sort of shore up the battlefield with this endless spell. Next, we have the Suffocating Gravetide, a casting value of 6, range of 6 inch, where it has to be deployed within the wizard before it starts. It's predatory, has a movement of 8, and can fly. After this model has moved, each unit passed across by this model must roll a number of dice equal to the number of models in that unit. And on a 6, that unit suffers a mortal wound. Pretty cool. This is really great for, you know, getting rid of hordes. And yes, I know the game is seeing less than on the table, but it means your opponent's invested more into general certain units, meaning you know where you're going to have to put the Gravetide. I think it's a great endless spell to have in this edition. It also is rather large as well, so it's going to hit a lot of units. You can really get this to sort of go across a couple of units just due to its large nature of that base. And just try and do as many mortal wounds across your opponent's army as possible. The Burning Head is a casting value of 7 and a range of 6 inch. It's predatory, moves 8, and can fly. This is pretty common sort of stats for all in the spells. However, it's got a really cool ability. So after this model is moved, if any units are within 1 inch of it after it's finished its move, you roll a dice for each of them, and on 2+, they suffer D3 mortals. But where it's cool is this endless spell is then removed. What's great is this allows you to then keep casting this every turn. Because you're not allowed to cast an endless spell in the turn it's removed, this does mean you can cast this, throw it at your enemy, do the mortal wounds, get it back. So this is really cool. Your opponent can't bunch up their units, so you're going to do D3 mortals to all of them on a pretty consistent sort of basis. So, you know, any sort of like hero-based power stuff, like playing against, say, like Hallowheart, where all the wizards generally like to stay close together to get their bonuses and stuff like that, is pretty nifty to be able to just throw the Burning Head at them. Which is funny because they're a magic heavy city and they don't like Burning Head, but generally that's what you want to try and do. You want to find spots where you're going to get the most out of this, throw it into your opponent, do as many mortal wounds as possible, then get it back, and so you can do it again the next turn. Forces your opponent to have to spread out. Next up, we have the Shards of Valagar. Casting value of 5 and a range of 18. Both parts of the spell must be set up within 12 inch of each other as well. This endless spell is predatory, which is really interesting for a dual part one. However, how you move this one is interesting. You remove one of the Shards of Valagar from play and then set it up wholly within 12 inch of the other part. After you've done this though, you resolve the effects of the spell. So you draw a line, a straight line between the two parts. And after you've done this, you see which units are crossed over by this line, and if they are, those units are ensnared. Ensnared units halve their movement and cannot fly. This is a really great endless spell, can really hamper your opponent's plans, and 12 inch can potentially get a couple of units in your opponent's army. Losing fly is massive. This can really hamper some armies' ability to move across the table quickly, and also just halving movement as well. It just doubles down and really hampers your opponent's movement. This combined with like Soulsnare Shackles can do some great movement abilities and just sort of debuff your opponent's movement. With the smaller board sizes and tables, you can really sort of use those two endless spells to control how your opponent plays and moves across the table. And lastly, we have Lauchon The Soulseeker, the ferryman himself, or the man riding the bringy dinghy. So it has a casting value of 6 and a range of 6 inch within the wizard. It's predatory and he moves at 18 inch and can fly. Now, what's cool about him is he can transport your wizards across the table. It is interesting to note, though, that he has a range of 3 inch around him, so the biggest wizards in the game can't move, but anything with less than a 3 inch diameter base can move. So that's something to know about him, on which ones he can do and which ones he can't. He's likely to not be able to, carry around the biggest wizards. They're not going to fit in his little bringy dingy. But he can help move some wizards around, and like combat wizards are really great, or short-range wizards with good spells are really nice to sort of use. I can see this working really well with like the Luminous Realm Lords, Lawseeker, etc. of these wizards that once they get to places are really hard to sort of remove from them. So that's the endless spells in the new edition, or at least the core ones anyway. I'd love to know all your thoughts on endless spells, what you're thinking of doing with them. Are you interested in how they work now? Do you like how they've changed them to work? Which ones are you potentially looking at to maybe run in your army? Or are there some faction-specific ones you think are really going to be fun to use now that they activate twice? Love to hear your thoughts and ideas in the comments below. Let us know. Well, thank you all for watching the video. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Also, while you're at it, why not come chat more with us on Discord? We've got a link in the description of the video below to our Discord server. You can come chat with me and other members of our fine little community here at Sinful Gaming. Lastly, we'd like to give a shout out to everyone who helps support the channel in various different ways. First of all, to our Patreon members, Christian Weir, James Soren, Chaos Spawn, AJC, Kenny Lowe, Outer and Shot First, James Crowder, Andrew Bowen, Nathan Fee, Tim Newman, The Rising Ape, Cure Dynamic, Agu, Anthony B, MJ, and Dyna226. Thank you to, as well, our YouTube members, Green Roots Gaming, Fire Titan, Steve T, The Real Zeot, Chris Wallace, Turriot12, Vinny, and Loch Lorick. And a special thanks to our artist who does all the channel art for us, Lady Witchfox Art, thank you very much. And to our Discord moderator, Xmorphic, you do a fantastic job on Discord for us as well. Thank you all, everyone, for watching. If you'd like to help support on Patreon or YouTube member or help support the channel in another way, you can do so by following one of the links in the description of the video to Patreon or YouTube members, or go buy some Sinful Gaming merch from our Teespring store, also linked in the video's description. That's it for today, everyone. Thank you again. Stay safe, stay well, and most of all, keep fighting that war against the Grey. Ciao for now.